Happy Tuesday, everybody. I hope you did well in the Arena Open or the Best of One play-in if you did that over this weekend. My ACDC Cash Open went off on Saturday and went well, so thanks for those who helped me make that happen. And if you'd like to join, it's going to be the first Saturday of each month. So the next one to look for will be June 1st, and we'll be playing Outlaws of Thunder Junction with cash prizes. So if you want to come play with us, hit me up on Discord. And every week I like to go over a draft build. So this is specifically for limited, not for constructed. And so we're going to dive deep into the color pair or archetype. And this week, Izzet Second Spell won the vote here on YouTube. So as usual, I like to start things off with my draft skeleton, consisting of 17 commons, 5 uncommons, and 1 rare or mythic. And for those listening audio only, the main takeaways are it's very similar to Dimir. And by that, I mean you want to treat this as a spell-slinging archetype, so don't be afraid if you have a low creature count. And my draft skeleton, for example, has 11 creatures. And I've had very low creature count decks that have done quite well, because the secret to double spelling multiple turns is card draw. And so you need a lot of spells to enable being able to double spell. So, because there's not a whole lot of creatures outside of the Loan Shark that are drawing you cards as you play them. And good news, those cards like Highway Robbery and Take the Fall are very undervalued, so we can take advantage of that fact. And red also has pretty good removal, especially like Thunder Salvo, which gets better the more spells that you've cast in a single turn, are usually less sought after than other red removal. And so this is, as is typical for the lowest win rate on 17 lands, is a decent space to explore when you're playing in paper or if you're doing in-pod drafting, rather than just trying to get the busted Golgari or busted Celestia decks that I covered 2 weeks ago. So another one to look for is Razzle Dazzler. That one is not performing particularly well outside of this archetype, and then therefore goes relatively late in a draft. And as long as you are double spelling, it becomes unblockable. So it's the big payoff at common for being able to double spell each turn, or as close to that as you can. Next up, we're going to cover the traps to avoid, and once again, since this archetype has the lowest win rate on 17 lands, you know that there are going to be plenty of cards to avoid. And with the larger picture in mind, let's dive into the 17 lands data. So 17 lands is a third-party site that tracks Magic the Gathering data. And what I like to do is I like to calculate the total wins created. And I do this by taking the average of the game played win rate and the game in hand win rate. And then I subtract the average win rate of all of the users in the archetype and multiply it by the numbers of games played. And what this allows me to do is look at the cards that are most positively affecting the archetype and are working for the most amount of players. So top of the list here, I'll read down real quickly. Most of these are the ones that were in my draft skeleton. So we've got Slick Sequence, Kraum, Violet Cacophony, Take the Fall, Prickly Pear, Longhorn Sharpshooter, Malcolm the Eyes, Thunder Salvo, Repulse, Irascible Wolverine, Explosive Derailment, Loan Shark, Eroded Canyon, Stoic Sphinx, Marauding Sphinx, Slick Shot, Lockpicker, and Duelist of the Mind. So if you don't know what those are, we're going to cover a good chunk of them here shortly. But the other thing that I can do is do the reverse of this and calculate the total wins destroyed. And so this is a good way to look at what is not working for the majority of players. And this does not mean that the card is unplayable, right? It just means that you kind of have to, a lot of times there's build around cards that you have to go out of your way to make work. But there are some cards that are just not giving you quite as much as you might be paying for. So for example, paying for a 4/3 flyer is not particularly good, even if you are in planning to plot this and then play it as a way to double spell. That has not worked particularly well for the blue-red archetype. So avoid the Djinn of Fool's Fall. And then Spring Splasher is a 2/1 for 1 and a blue. Whenever Spring Splasher attacks, target creature gets -3/-0 until end of turn. Talked about this one in Dimir, where it actually makes a little bit more sense because it at least commits a crime every time that it's attacking. But the problem with this card is that it gets outclassed quite quickly. On turn 4, it's not uncommon for them to play a 4/4, which then, even if you give it -3/-0, is still able to block this and kill it. So Spring Splasher is not bringing enough to the table. Of note, I'd also like to add that just in general, I've not been super impressed with the amount of 2-drops in the set in general. It does feel like you want to kind of maximize the later part of your curve, because your 2-drops have a tendency to get outclassed, kind of like they're supposed to. And then Rodeo Pyromancers is one that I think people are attracted to because whenever you cast your first spell, each turn you add double pip red. The problem is that to get this started, you need one spell, and then the second spell that you cast, most of your spells you're trying to keep them cheap so that you can double spell every turn. And what this allows you to do is do a cheap spell first and then a more expensive spell second. And if you're doing a 1-cost thing, then it kind of adds a mana, but it still hasn't played out very well. And then, as I mentioned, the 3/4 body just does not line up well against the giant beaver in green as kind of its counterpart as a 4/4 vigilance. So it gets outclassed quite quickly. So I'd recommend avoiding that one as well. So the next thing I can do is, after I calculate those wins created, I divide them by the number of times that the card was picked, and graph it against the average taken at the point at what time was the card taken at in a draft, and fit the data with a logarithmic regression. And notably here on the floating down, excuse me, floating down near the bottom is Fibblethip. So sadly, Fibblethip has not been performing very well, and that's generally because the plot mechanic again is not working as well as maybe the creators had hoped. A lot of well, I'll cover that a little bit more in detail in Simic. It's not that it's unplayable. It's just that it's tricky to play to figure out the right timing between whether or not you plot or don't. So next up on the list, though, what we can do is calculate the distance of the cards wins per pick, and then calculate the distance from the fitted line as a way to kind of value which cards are doing the best at which time points within the draft. So again, I'm not going to go over every single one just because there are a lot of cards to cover, and kind of want to keep this so everybody can get along with their day. And so top of the list here was Stoic Sphinx. You get a 5/3 flash flyer for 2 double pip blue, and then it has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn. So being able to flash this in on your opponent's turn, and then your turn it has hexproof and they can't do anything about it, is great when they're at 5 life, and definitely a game winner. And then we've got Giralf the Fleshright. Whenever you cast a spell during your turn other than the first spell that you cast, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token. And then whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other zombie that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So as long as you are chaining spells, which is the point of this archetype, then Giralf it creates a zombie, and the zombies get bigger every single time that you're doing it. So if you can set up a whole bunch of plot cards and make a massive single turn, Giralf is great, and works particularly well in Izzet. And then we've got good old Mana Drain, and I talked about this one before. Being able to counter your opponent's spell, and then next turn gain mana equal to that spell's mana value, is a way to just completely outclass your opponent's tempo. And next up, we've got the value of a replacement for picks 2.5 through 5, and this is usually where you see your undervalued rares and usually your uncommons. Top of the list here, we have Malcolm the Eyes, and I've even actually seen this one wheel and like be the last card in the pack. That's how unloved blue-red is, and I think it's because a lot of people aren't approaching the archetype well. I do believe that it is a viable archetype, although, if you're running it as your typical 15 creatures mid-range deck, you're really going to struggle. So it's not particularly beginner friendly, similar to Dimir. And but the Malcolm the Eyes coming in as a 2/2 flying haste that whenever you cast your second spell creates a clue token that you can then use to draw, fits perfectly into the Izzet archetype. And if you look at the Vorp value, you can see Malcolm of the Eyes is definitely an outlier. And I think you should take advantage of the fact that nobody wants to pick it up. And Duelist of the Mind is particularly good. It's a star 3 flying vigilance for 1 and a blue that is power is equal to the number of cards that you've drawn. And as I mentioned, to enable your double spelling, you want to be drawing cards. And then whenever you commit a crime, you draw a card. So this helps you also commit the double spell. And then you do have to discard a card after you draw. So it's a loot, and it only triggers once each turn. But if you're doing your highway robberies and your loan sharks and your take the falls and things like that, then Duelist of the Mind can be a pretty sizable threat in Izzet. And then we have Longhorn Sharpshooter, which is a 3/3 reach for 2 and a red that when you plot it, it deals 2 damage to any target. This hits a fair amount of targets. There are a fair amount of things that just have 2 toughness. And then most importantly is that it is a 3/3 reach creature, and white-blue especially leans heavily on flyers. And so being able to have the 3/3 reach is one of the big payoffs of actually being in red is the Longhorn Sharpshooter. However, a lot of people know this, and so this one is going at the typical time that you see uncommons go. And then for picks 5 through 8, this is where you usually start to see some of your undervalued uncommons and mostly commons. And the list, again, for this set is very long. There's a lot of cards that fit into the pick 5 through 8 category and are rather, take it or leave it, rather comparable to one another. So everything that has a VORP value of 0 is kind of all on the same level in my eyes. And this is a really good time to be picking up the deserts because they don't count towards your 23 cards and can kind of give you that edge against your opponent. But top of the list here, we've got the Slick Sequence, which is an undervalued uncommon because the blue-red space is a lot of people just avoid it. And it deals 2 damage to any target at instant speed for a blue and a red. And then if you cast another spell this turn, you draw a card, which is exactly what Izzet wants to be doing. The other thing, too, is Kraum, the Violent Cacophony, which is the Izzet signpost. Is a 2/3 flyer for 2, a blue and a red, that whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Kraum and draw a card. Again, with the card draw enabling you to continue to do double spells throughout your turn as long as you, or throughout the game, as long as you kind of go into the archetype, making that the point of what your deck is trying to do. And then we don't even get to see a common yet, right? So we have a severely undervalued rare, which is Ionize, which allows you to counter target spell and then deal 2 damage to that spell's controller. So one of the things that you are leaning into, or at least have at your fingertips, are cards like Ionize and Mana Drain, where you can be playing this as a reactive strategy where you're answering your opponent's threats. And then last but not least is the value of a replacement for picks 8 and onward, and these are the cards that wheel. And so for the people who are new to draft, that means you see them a second time. And we've got a really good list, which, you know, points to blue-red being underdrafted and a pretty good space to take advantage of if you so choose. And some people like to avoid the worst archetype in the set and force the best ones. And I think that going towards the underdrafted stuff has its advantages for sure. Especially, again, when you're drafting in a more competitive space than Arena, in paper or in pod tournaments like my Cash Open. The winner was in blue, black, red, and the second place was in blue, red with a little bit of black. So notably no green in the more competitive spaces, and I've seen this in some of the limited tournaments that I frequent as well. So top of the list here is Take the Fall, and again, it's really helpful for the double spelling because for a single blue, you draw a card, and honestly, that's all this card needs to do. And then if you control an outlaw, it gives something -4, -0, and that's just kind of like icing on top. Really, you're just using this as a double spell enabler. And then Irascible Wolverine is one that you'll notice is usually a trap card, and it usually makes it into the top 15 cards to avoid in the red archetypes. Izzet is the exception, and it's going to be the same way for the Razzle Dazzler, the 1/2 unblockable. They're both cards that just don't work well unless you're double spelling. And so with Wolverine, you're not really double spelling, but it helps you. It helps you to double spell by being able to plot this and then play this and then draw something cheap from your deck and then play it. And so it works relatively well in this archetype. And then last but not least is highway robbery. As I mentioned at the very beginning, card draw is very important, and once you've kind of flooded out, you can discard lands, you can sacrifice lands that you've already played. So this one has worked a little bit better, especially in an archetype that's looking to draw cards than previous versions of this, which always have to discard a card to draw the 2 cards. So I hope that was helpful. I do enjoy doing these things, and I do hope, let me know in the comments below if you got yourself an Izzet, an Izzet trophy after listening to this, and how many of these cards made up the deck that you were running. So tomorrow I'll be covering Simic, as it got the second most number of votes here on YouTube, and I hope that if you did play in the best of one play-in qualifier or the Arena Open last weekend, that you had better luck than I did. I had a pretty good Golgari deck, but there are a lot of bombs in this set, and I feel like it's a pretty high variance set, and I definitely made some mistakes. So let me know how it went for you in the comments below. I do love hearing back from you guys, and especially about how your Magic the Gathering adventures have been going. So remember to click like and subscribe. It is the best way to help support me, and it's free. And I also like to, I will also be including the updated version of my value over replacement guide in the description for those who may find that helpful. And you can also join my Discord. I do post one there every Friday. And, feel free to drop by on Twitch. I stream Tuesday through Friday. And sometimes Monday's been I'm moving things around a little bit then, but I do host a community draft every Tuesday if you'd like to come play with us. And special thanks to my YouTube members, Twitch subscribers, and Patreons. Thank you for helping my dream come true. And as always, good luck with your games and future trophies.